The day a woman in a navy suit told me I had 72 hours to vacate my own cabin, I laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, but because life had a way of serving absurdity with a side of legalese. Victoria Ashworth stood in my doorway like a stormfront gray eyes, perfectly manicured fingers clutching a stack of papers that smelled faintly of institutional ink, and behind her 3 burly men in dark suits looked like they'd been cast straight out of a bad noir film. They all assumed I'd crumble. What they didn't know was that the house beneath my feet had been hiding a secret for 175 years, and when secrets wake up, they tend to make a mess of plans. My name's Marcus Bennett. I fix old wood for a living, spent 15 years in museums in Boston, reading grain the way sommeliers read a wine list, and when the city started weighing on me, I took the kind of leap people write essays about, sold my little flat, bought a truck, followed a map until the asphalt gave up. Pine Ridge Lake looked like the world's best idea and worst audition tape at the same time. Beautiful, quiet, and full of abandoned properties, the town auctioned off like clearance items. I bid 25 cents on a cabin that everyone else called rotting lumber, and the room laughed until the gavels fell. I drove out the next day because curiosity is a dangerous hobby for someone with my training. From the road, the place looked surrendered, leaning pines, a sagging porch shingles like tired teeth. Up close, the bones told a different story. American chestnut beams the size of telephone poles, mortise and tenon joinery, cut like a whisper pegs, set with a confidence you don't see in weekend projects. Whoever built this didn't rush. They designed. They obsessed. And then tucked into some corner where only the patient and the foolish would bother to look, I found tiny, precise carvings. Not haphazard initials, but a whole secret language. Celtic knots, astronomical configurations, microscopic botanical flourishes, signatures stitched into the ribs of the house. That discovery turned my weekend hobby into a slow-moving avalanche. I trained a couple stealth cameras, not because I expected thieves, but because people who care that much about old things usually have a reason, and sure enough, a black BMW made regular appearances. An older woman with silver hair would park up the road watch, take notes. Sometimes she came alone, sometimes with others. She had money written into the way she held herself. She had that look people get when they're measuring the worth of something they want. I did what my museum life taught me: document first, broadcast second. I started an account called Wood Detective NH and teased the work close-ups, measurements, hints without giving away the entire skeleton. Part of archaeology is staging, and part of preservation is politics. If I built an audience and a narrative, I could shape the story before someone else with deeper pockets and fewer scruples did. Then I called Ellen Eller Hartwell at the Smithsonian, a woman I'd worked with years ago. She named the carver, within an hour Elias Whitmore, a craftsman who'd vanished after 1850, whose chairs sold for prices that justified a small mortgage. If those little marks were Whitmore's, this cabin wasn't a cabin. It was a masterpiece disguised as shelter. When she said the word Whitmore, my heart did that ridiculous thing it does when you find out you've accidentally bought a rare coin at a yard sale. Rumors have a gravity of their own in small towns. I played into that physics. I bought coffee at the only shop, talked loudly about Smithsonian interest, let the right people overhear the right lines. It didn't take long for Victoria Ashworth to respond, not with a knock, but with a community meeting staged like a courtroom. She took the podium at the Pine Ridge Community Center and painted me as an outsider bent on commercializing local history for profit. Her speech had cadence, timing, and the practiced authority of someone who'd been shaping narratives for generations. I stood up in the middle of her performance and said calmly that I wanted to work with the town, that if what I'd found was Whitmore's, this belonged to the town's story just as much as it belonged to any collector. The room shifted. People leaned in. That's when the real player stepped out of the woodwork, Eleanor Hartwell, not the Smithsonian woman now, but Pine Ridge's retired librarian, a woman who'd spent 55 years and a lifetime sweating over town records. She pulled me aside and said quietly, "There's more than you know. The Ashworths have been playing chess on this board for nearly 2 centuries." Her basement archives smelled like dust and righteous anger. Thomas Ashworth's leather journal cracked open stories of obsession, offers to buy the land insults to Whitmore's refusal sketches of a grand resort. The Ashworth plan wasn't new. It was generational strategy. When Ellen Eller placed a folded letter in my hand that hinted Whitmore had hidden instructions among the stars, I thought she was being poetic. Then she suggested, as any good historian would, we look at the house from above. On a clear October night with a nearly full moon slicing the field into silver and black, we launched a drone. From the cockpit of my controller, the roof resolved into something impossible. Slats and shingles positioned with surgical intent, light and shadow drawn into a geometric pattern that, when compared to astronomical charts from October 1850, matched Ursa Major Big Dipper pointing to Polaris with uncanny accuracy. Whitmore hadn't just built a house, he'd built a map. The map led us to an ancient oak. We dug where the star map pointed, because at that point, why not believe in a little adventure? The ground surrendered an iron box wrapped in leather that smelled like the sea, and inside Whitmore's will, written in a hand that looked like music. He bequeathed the property to whomever possessed the soul and patience to perceive beauty hidden within decay, and he spelled out a condition: half the assessed value must seed an arts education fund for local children. That one document made the entire Ashworth playbook look like vanity, and it made my tiny 25-cent deed suddenly a matter of public conscience. Then the story turned ugly in a way that made it personal. Jake Morrison, my Boston lawyer and friend, called with another ledger. Victoria had been running her HOA like a legal meat grinder, levying fines so absurd they forced families into foreclosure. My parents had been one of those families. Hearing Jake recount how fines and bureaucracy had hollowed them out, how my father's health had folded like bad paper, shifted this from a restoration project to a moral imperative. We weren't just protecting beams, we were confronting a machine that consumed people. Victoria responded the way cornered empires do, with lawyers' rhetoric and a founding heritage clause from 1847 she claimed gave the community authority over any culturally significant site. She trotted out experts and precedent. She sounded convincing. But Jake found a crack. The HOA was a private corporation founded in 1985. It had no legal hand on the 1847 charter. She'd been borrowing ancestral authority like a costume. In court, the difference between a costume and the crown matters. The hearing was theater taken seriously. Journalists, neighbors, school teachers with shaky hands, a bank of smartphone live streams. Victoria's legal team presented PowerPoints like they were wrapping paper. Then Jake spoke calm, surgical. He dismantled the claim piece by piece, corporate charters and incorporation documents sliding across the table like evidence in a movie. I stood up and showed the drone footage, the signatures, Whitmore's will. When the will read aloud filled the room, something like quiet thunder rolled through the crowd. The revelation exposed a contrast so stark it felt biblical. Whitmore's desire to protect and teach versus the Ashworth plan to monetize and exclude. Thomas Ashworth's cipher, decoded, read like a manifesto of entitlement. Whitmore's will read like a promise. The hearing board voted unanimously. The HOA lacked authority. My ownership stood, and state authorities should investigate Ashworth practices. Victory, though, isn't the end of a story. It's the point where consequences finally get to do their work. Within days, the Attorney General opened an investigation. Within weeks, FBI agents executed warrants. Within months, Victoria was shipped off assets, frozen, her empire dismantled. News crews called it the Pine Ridge Scandal. Congress used it to hold hearings about HOA abuses. Whitmore's cabin, when experts were finally done fussing and valuing, was worth millions. I could have sold it and disappeared into retirement, but Whitmore's handwriting kept tugging at me: stewardship, not possession. We honored the will. Half the cabin's assessed value seeded the Elias Whitmore Arts Education Foundation workshops, scholarships, apprenticeships in woodworking and traditional crafts. Jake started a legal nonprofit protecting homeowners. LL&R digitized the town archives and became a living legend. The families Victoria had pushed out had homes returned or given housing solutions. The cabin itself became a research locus and a refuge for makers. Watching a 12-year-old named Emma set a perfect mortise and tenon with the reverence of a person doing something sacred made whatever noise my parents' loss had caused finally make sense. 2 years later, standing in that cabin while young hands traced the little hidden signatures Whitmore had carved, I finally understood his language. He'd built a test not for value, not for title, but for patience and stewardship. True ownership, I learned, is less about holding a deed and more about holding a responsibility to protect, to teach, to ensure beauty survives beyond profit. There was a moment after the sentence, after the checks cut and the foundations registered, when I had a small, guilty smile. People who thought they could buy a town with paperwork and intimidation discovered they'd underestimated the thing that binds communities together, not contracts, but conscience. Justice, in that slow, bureaucratic, sometimes glacial way, did its work. I won't pretend it was clean or that everything healed instantly. People carry scars, and some things can't be reversed simply because money changes hands. But watching the town reclaim its narrative, hearing kids laugh in workshops, where once there had been whispered threats that was close enough to vindication. If there's a lesson tucked under all this dust, it's this: power dressed as authority can be very convincing, and property law is a tangle where the intimidated often lose. But systems built on secrecy and fear can be unmade by stubborn curiosity, careful documentation, and the kind of stubborn human relationships that survive court transcripts. Whitmore's greatest trick wasn't hiding a will in a box. It was trusting that someone would care enough not to loot, but to listen and to teach. So here's the question I'll leave you with, and I want to hear what you think when people claim moral authority because their family has held power for generations. Does that give them a right to reshape a community around private gain, or does it make them more accountable to the people whose lives they affect? Drop a comment below. Tell us whether loyalty to tradition is ever an excuse for greed, and if you've ever stood up to a neighbor, a board, or a system that seemed too big to fight. Share your story, like if this opened your eyes, and subscribe if you want more stories of ordinary people making big trouble for powerful bullies, because sometimes the quietest cabins hold the loudest truths.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video. Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.